Welcome to update number 7 for Project Breach. The two big things I wanted to get done to finish up the engine were area triggers and a cinematic editor, and that's essentially what I've done. Area triggers can now be placed down and used in the map event system as a trigger. Although I can't think of any reasons off the top of my head, I figured spending a little bit of extra effort to make so you can customize if pawns activate your trigger would be worthwhile. These area triggers took slightly longer than I expected, just because I had to figure out some math that I hadn't expected with regards to placement. Since aligning the corners to the exact position of a tile would make it the center of a tile and would result in the trigger not actually covering the whole tile. Once those were done, I had the tools I needed to start on the cutscene editor. But then it occurred to me, I don't remember using a cutscene editor when I made maps for Warcraft 3. How did they do it? So after just looking it up, it turns out they just used their map event system. And this was perfect, because it meant I just needed to add a ton of new actions to my existing events editor, and I'd be able to support cutscenes/cinematics. Now, I'm not going to list every new action I've added, because it's quite a few, but it's all the essentials and a few extras for what I would consider necessary to being able to do cutscenes. The second thing I had to do was to make so map events could be triggered over time instead of just all at once, so I added a wait action. Right off the bat, I knew that having a single enter cinematic mode action, which, froze the player and enemies or whatever else would be expected of entering a cutscene, wouldn't be how I wanted to do it, because freezing players and enemies could be their own useful actions, which could be used for plenty of things outside of, cutscenes. As well as the fact that some cutscenes might do things differently from each other. So having a universal cinematics action would only really limit how much people could do with the system. But having to create like 6 or 7 actions every time you wanted to create a new cutscene, like stop player movement, stop AI logic, show cutscene bars, etc., it would be quite annoying, which, I learned firsthand trying to make cutscenes with. So my solution was to create action templates. And so now, with all these new actions and a template system, we can now make cutscenes. So it's not quite a cutscene editor per se, but an extension of existing tools which let us make cutscenes. I've also added starting music to the environment tab, which is pretty self-explanatory, and a map event action that lets you change the music. The map editor is now also able to save your preferences, so if you toggle on or off the lighting or anything else like that inside of the editor will remember that for the next time you boot it up. And an old remnant of when the engine was being made for an RTS was that a new map started with 4 active slots, and each slot to a different team. So I've gone ahead and fixed that up, and now maps just default to 1 slot, and all slots default to being on the same team. And you may have already noticed from the video, the player and pawns have a new effect I named Mickey Mouse Bounce, which I just think adds a nice bit of artistic flair. I've also updated the player UI to include HP next to the health bar, and I've added support for camera shake when the player fires a weapon, which can easily be adjusted in the weapon file. Moving on to pawns. Pawn Dialogue was a system created in the second game update published in March 19th, 2021, when the engine was originally being designed for an RTS. I'd actually kind of forgotten this system existed until I wanted to work on sound effects for when pawns took damage, and to my surprise, found that I had already programmed such a system under Pawn Dialogue. The reason pawns weren't already using the system was because, since the game was designed for an RTS, I didn't want random voice/tech prompts giving away enemy positions, so dialogue only got played if it was by pawns who were on your team. And with the current game setup, no pawns are on your team, so nothing ever played, and eventually I just forgot the system existed at all. So I simply removed the requirement that pawn dialogue only be played by friendly pawns, and I was able to add sounds for when pawns take damage without changing really much of anything else. And that's it for this update. Now that I'm finishing the engine, I'm pretty hyped. This update and the next update, the engine will be done, and I'll be doing almost nothing but working on the actual game. Figuring out where the game takes place, what the story is, what the theme is, adding levels, enemies, weapons. I'm getting excited just thinking about it. Will you be the cartel taking on other cartels? Will you be a Doom Demon Slayer? I don't know. We'll find out. Once this engine is finished, the possibilities are endless. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.